by all means, very warm welcome to you to this new session with Middle East Policy Council in its new version, its new revamp. This is one of the first sessions we are going to have today. We will be talking about Israel-Iran war, regional reordering, and the future of the global stability. I'm very glad here to be accompanied with my esteemed colleagues. I have Caroline Rose, who might all of you know. She is a director of crime, conflict nexus, and military withdrawals at New Lines Institute, and Elizabeth Tsurkov, who's a non-resident fellow at New Lines, and including myself, I have another two defect senior fellows from New Lines to MEPC, Faysal Itani and Sultan al. A very warm welcome to you guys. We'll go through this by setting the foundation, and we'll have a few your insights on this ongoing conflict, which is really, I can understand how overwhelming all this information coming all around. So it might be need some time to grasp, to analyze, and to understand how it goes. So after setting that, we'll open the floor for Q&As. That will be by the half past, because we need to finish by 10 to 3. That's 2:50. We will be ending the session. But if you have any questions, please send them over. I'll get them on WhatsApp so we can carry on in the Q&A session. And allow me to start first. I will go to Caroline, because I want to set the foundation to see what the US, and you've been spending some time across all these decision-making entities in the States, if you like, what America wants to achieve from this.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me on. And I just want to say, I hope that everyone watching this, I hope everyone here, that they're staying safe, both in the region and just around the world. I know this week has been very trying and very unpredictable. In terms of what the United States wants to achieve, there have been stated objectives, and then there have also been some indications, even after these strikes have been launched, that are piecing together, I think, this gradual puzzle of what really prompted the United States to strike. The most obvious, I think, objective that has been put out by this administration has been regime change from the top down inside of Iran. Now, how they can achieve this is a whole other story, but I think it's very clear that even despite negotiations over Iran's nuclear program, which certainly was a factor, but ultimately I think it really was regime change that prompted the United States to try and conduct these strikes and take out Khamenei, and of course now try and follow up with additional strikes and expand this further inland. Additionally, and we've just heard this just today at the Department of War, there was a statement that was made by Secretary of War Pete Hegseth that mentioned that Trump was in some ways seeking revenge, and he got the last laugh. Was, I think, one of the quotes that he mentioned in the press newsroom. How apparently this was a strike that was motivated by the previous assassination attempt against Trump in July 2024, where a Pakistani man, Asif Merchant, was believed to have tried to carry out an assassination attempt in coordination with an individual who was an FBI informant. This was thwarted. This individual is currently on trial. But it is interesting because I think it adds another element that we haven't heard a lot about, in the sense of there was a lot of personal motivation in the calculus that went into these strikes against Iran. And additionally, I think that looking at the big picture, zooming out, multiple times, I think that the United States is looking to disengage from the Middle East. It is looking for different actors to inherit some of the security responsibilities and commitments that the United States has upheld really since the conclusion of the Iraq War. And now it is starting to identify a strategy where it is looking for countries like Israel, as well as Saudi Arabia, its partners in the Gulf, its partners in the Levant, across the region, to take up these responsibilities, as well as now neutralize this perceived existential threat posed by Iran. Initially, they thought that negotiations could get them there. They thought that neutralizing Iran-backed proxies could. But I think, at least in the last month or two, the Trump administration came to this conclusion that Iran politically, the entire system had to be collapsed. And as a result, they have pursued this regime change campaign. And I'll leave it there.
No, thank you very much. That's very interesting. But mentioning the revenge, it's really very interesting. I remember during some investigative journalism I used to do regarding Russia, for instance, there was always that Putin revenging from someone because he was attempted to kill and assassinate him or stuff. And I remember in Israel, Avi Dachter, the well-known, the head of Shin Bet, later telling me that Israel never conduct operations in a sense of revenge, but there is always a strategic logic. And from taking that, I want to ask Elizabeth. I know you've been doing a very interesting work in Iraq, Syria, as well as you are aware of the internal dynamics in Iran. But Liz, I want to ask you first about Israel. What the end game in Israel now? We've seen 7th of October, then the military and the security doctrine has changed, as we've been told, but rarely the discussions inside Israel is people are not listening or not hearing a lot about it.
Well, that's not a coincidence because there isn't a clear strategy. Israeli policy, and this is something that has plagued Israeli policy making for decades, lacks, there's no institution, there's no powerful institution in Israel that is responsible for strategic planning on the political level. There is a directorate of planning inside the IDF, which does, a good job of planning military operations, their sequencing, etc., to achieve military goals. But then the how to translate these these military gains into strategic or political gains, that is the part that is consistently missing. And this is something that we've seen throughout the wars over the past, since October 7th, but also prior to this. After this is something that was discussed in the report following, for example, the 2006 war, the investigative committee that was set up in Israel to investigate the war. This is a fault that they pointed to, and still it has not been addressed for multiple structural reasons that I don't want to go into right now. Mm-hmm. But the result is that there is no clear strategy. However, in Israel's view, whatever comes next in Iran, with this conflict now lasting several days, even if the war stops immediately right now, and it won't, but even if it did, for Israel, those past 5 days of bombings are a great achievement. For Israel, Israel, in the view of its leadership, is now in a better position than it was 5 days ago. The repressive power, the military capabilities, the number of launchers of missiles, of long-range ballistic missiles, all of them have been reduced and significantly degraded. Now, Israel overall, the goal has been said to be regime change, but it appears that Israel is pursuing two different paths. One is to destroy enough of the repressive apparatus so that then when strikes stop and some people return to their homes, they can then come into the streets and revolt. And will feel safe to do so, and will be able to take over the government somehow. And this would maybe somehow involve the Reza Pahlavi, who is the deposed crown prince, who is close to Israel, and Israel appears to want him to be the next leader of Iran. So he has called for protests in January, and indeed millions of people came out into the streets in Iran and then got slaughtered. So they may use him again for this purpose. The other alternative appears to be going on the separatist minority route, which involves supporting, arming the Kurdish militias that are based in Iraq but are Iranian, and now conducting a very ferocious bombing campaign across Iranian Kurdistan to basically degrade the regime's capabilities there so much that then Kurdish forces are able to enter and take control over this territory. However, I don't understand exactly what's the long-term planning here, and I don't think there is one, about how do you then, okay, let's say they grab all of the Kurdish majority areas. Then you would need to basically create a no-fly zone and continuously protect this area for the regime not to send in thousands, hundreds of thousands of forces to reoccupy the area. So this is not really clear, but in Israel's view, even, just those, 5 days of bombings, even that is much better than nothing.
That's very interesting. And anyone who've been to these areas in the border between Iraqi Kurdistan and Iran will know how even the Kurd militants, Komala and the stuff. I remember a few years back when they were bombing, I was there. But it's very, really difficult corridor. How even drug traffickers facing problems to cross all these kind of mountains. So strategically, it's really a question. I can see where you are coming from, but that leads even the no strategy, as you put it in Israel, translated into a sort of upper hand in the terms of deterrence in the regional policy. So I want to take these questions to Sultan. If you look how the regional powers can see this, because even though, as we heard from Liz, a lack of strategy, or if we don't understand it, but it turned out there is Israel able and can hit anywhere they feel that they are threatened. We've seen that Doha, south of Syria, now Iran, of course. This is third time maybe in a course of few months, and this is the biggest one. How the regional powers see that?
Thank you, Murad, and thank you for having me. So I would say that normally when we talk about the Middle East, we talk about a region that has mainly four regional powers. So Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, and Israel. And now with Iran being weakened to this level, and with the unrestricted actions of the Israeli military in the region, I think that is slowly, but in a sustained way, leading policymakers, specifically in the Gulf, to rethink how to deal with Israel, and that I think would be one of the major strategic issues that they will be grappled with once this war ends afterwards. And in addition to that as well, I would say that the clear now divergence of policies between the United States and its allies in the Gulf, that would also lead to a strategical reconsideration after the war, because we've been hearing from commentators, people in the region who are close to policymakers, that what is the value of these military bases if they are similar to what happened during this war, that can be used as a liability in these countries instead of being an asset, as the role of these bases has been envisioned after the Saddam occupation of Kuwait. So I think what we are seeing now would lead to major strategic thinking on these levels, on the relationship with the United States, and the relationship and the potential and value of normalization with Israel, given the current behavior that we see in the region.
Do you think they would join the Gulf states, the campaign against Iran these days?
So as things stand, as of today, the major inclination that they are comfortable with the defensive posture that they have, that there will not be attempt to join the attacks against them. All the Gulf countries got hit by Iranian missiles, specifically UAE, which got the most of the hits. UAE, there was some leaks by Axios that that UAE might join, but then the foreign ministry in the United Arab Emirates released a statement saying that we are currently strictly adopting a defensive measure instead of attacking.
Interesting. And one of the examples in the region among all these powers, which is, I think, it's a lab for all this kind of, it's been a lab always. It's Lebanon, of course. And so I'll bring Faysal here to say what is going on in the south of Lebanon now. Hezbollah have contradicting kind of, we are not intervening, we are intervening, 6 missiles, not 6 missiles. All these discussions leading to a bombing again. And many, even myself, many journalists in Lebanon called me to give a quotes, is there will be a ground operation or not. So yeah, I directed them to you or to Tel Aviv, and they can ask others. What do you think? What's going on down there?
Yeah, so let me tie this in very briefly with what I think the big picture is, because I think from an Israeli point of view, there's some kind of certainty over what would make them happy in Iran and what they would stop at. But I think even for Israel and especially for the United States, there's a little more fluidity here in goals. And I really don't think that there's a final decision to change this regime. I think I think both powers are experimenting with power in Iran and seeing what comes up. It's kind of grab bag strategy, what I call it. And whatever happens, really, it's good for the United States and Israel. So there's no scenario in which they end up worse off. So expect to see a lot of fluctuation, really, in what's going on. I think most of us understand you cannot change regimes in a controlled manner with an air campaign. It's much more complicated than that. Stuff like sending in Kurdish militias, yeah, this is very dangerous for the regime, but I'm not sure those guys are in the mood to fight to take over all of Iran and take the casualties, etc. I'm not sure. So, having said that, that's how we understand what's happening in Lebanon by looking at and gauging what kind of pressure is happening in Iran. If you had asked me 5 days ago, would I think there would have been Hezbollah opening a front against the Israelis in Lebanon, or Iran opening a front, which is the same thing, against the Israelis in Lebanon? I would have said no. In fact, my prediction that I made in writing last week was that I thought the Israelis were going to start it and take advantage of the situation, push Hezbollah back, hammer them. But in fact, that's not what happened, although it became clear the Israelis were ready for this. And as soon as it started with those 6, not missiles even, those very, very poor quality 6,
Rockets, yeah.
Grad ballistic rockets that did nothing. All of us in Lebanon, we were kind of perplexed as to why this would happen. But now that we've given it a little bit of thought, I think we understand that Hezbollah was ordered to make sure that there was at least something going on in Lebanon that would expose the Israelis rather than just sitting back and getting bombed by Israel. Israel, I think, since the ceasefire of October 2024, has struck Hezbollah 1,400 times. And Hezbollah has fought back twice against 1,400 bombings. I think they probably understood that in the context of what's happening to the Iranians, this is no longer an acceptable dynamic, and they want to shake it up and see what happens. I do, though, I've heard from 3 reputable sources that I do trust that there is going to be a significant Israeli ground incursion into Lebanon, probably up to the Litani River. And we've seen this game before many, many times in Lebanon, this movie. But it's a little bit different this time because there seems to be this mass displacement of the population. And this is the population that's supposed to be the constituency of Hezbollah. And I think you don't have to be a kind of top-level Mossad agent to know, there's some tension going on between the constituency and the party. And most lately, this attack over the border, even if the Israelis were going to do something anyway, it seems like some people are blaming Hezbollah, which, I mean, of course, it's Hezbollah's fault, but that's not usually the reaction. The reaction is usually the Israelis are going to hit us no matter what, therefore let's let Hezbollah fight. But it seems to be within the constituency of Hezbollah, the Shia in Lebanon, that there is genuine rancor over this and anger. So if that's the case, I don't know what happens once you start pushing tens of thousands of people up towards Beirut. I know that there's many problems involved in addition to the human suffering, which is that you put all those people in contact with people in Lebanon who frankly don't like them. And they have a lot of tension with these groups. So it's a very messy situation. I'm not sure exactly what the goal would be, but I think it's going to happen. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, it's a messy situation. Anyway, let's go back to Iran and I want to bring Caroline here. So we are talking, but what do you think? Faisal said in both ways, Americans and Israelis could benefit from the situation in Iran. But let's say if the state collapsed, then people today are talking about different kind of scenarios. But however, it's very diverse community societies in Iran. It's large. It's on Hormuz Strait. It's strategically very important. It's by the Gulf. So and it's the gateway to the greater Middle East, if you like, as we call it here at MEPC. So the thing is, this is not, I don't think it will serve American interest in a say, some would say. What do you think? You are on a mute, Caroline.
You'd think after all of these years. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, and I completely agree with Faisal in the sense of, by trying to encourage a collection of ragtag militias and Kurdish networks, some based in Iraq, some based in Iran, to commandeer a nationwide resistance movement and topple the existing regime, even at this moment of vulnerability. That is a long shot. And of course, I think history has shown us that the United States does not do well when it comes to regime change, trying to change governance, and then also, of course, empowering certain sectarian or ethnic identities in the Middle East as well as abroad generally. That being said, I think that the Trump administration has launched this offensive to achieve a few very quick goals that it will try and contest or it will try and uphold and create a narrative around. Number one, that the United States is tough in the face of Iran. And that is something that I think that the Trump administration has really tried to build with negotiations. Also with the narrative when they were engaging Iranian officials just a few weeks before, trying to build this narrative of we will strike if you do not reach consensus with us on not only the nuclear file, but also when they added and engaged other files like ballistic missiles. And that is something that I think the Trump administration will try and defend, whether this offensive works or does not work. They'll say, look, we were tough in the face of Iran. We were able to engage. Look at how this strike campaign, how sophisticated it was. They were precision strikes against Khamenei. We can only do that in coordination with our partners like the Israeli government. And I think that is something that this administration will really try and uphold. But also, I think it's notable the last few days, Trump and this administration have also tried to set up the stage and try and prime conditions for if this operation is not successful, if there is no regime change, if the successor happens to be Khamenei's son or another cleric who does not espouse the policies that the United States wants to see within the Iranian regime. I think that the United States, there is a possibility that the White House, this administration, will point their fingers towards the Iranian people and say, well, Trump tweeted out and sent out all of this messaging, encouraging Iranian civilians to take to the streets, saying that this was their moment, this was the opportunity. Go ahead and essentially take control of your fate. And I think that there's a possibility that, especially since we are starting to stare down the barrel of this 4-week timeline, the Trump administration really only has about 60 days total before the War Powers Act comes into effect. So there's a limited time period. And then on top of that, I think the Trump administration won't have a lot of patience in engaging in a direct war against Iran and all that comes with it for at least 60 days. So knowing that there's that limited time period, I could see very easily that this administration winds down operations and then moves and puts some space between this and essentially comes to the conclusion that the Iranian people just could not conduct the resistance that they had called them to do. I could see that scenario playing out, along with a few others as well.
That's very interesting and true. If let's say if the son of Ali Khamenei, Mujtaba, came as a supreme leader now, he's connected to all these kind of Revolutionary Guard as well, Al-Basij. So that would raise a question how concessions, how he able to negotiate. But also that reminds us of Arafat in 80s, though you want someone who has a word, who can affect and influence to negotiate. And from there, I will bring Liz in. Mr. Trump was talking about that even Reza Pahlavi couldn't be the choice. He's looking for, as he put it, someone from inside to talk with. And what are the main players in Iran today who could play that role? Who's who in this sense in Tehran today, if we are witnessing a regime change in a sense?
The problem is that, as I've mentioned and other speakers have, there's no real clear strategy here. And therefore, it appears that there are three simultaneous tracks that are being pursued. One is degrade regime's capabilities enough so the people rise up and take over the country, and maybe Reza Pahlavi returns, maybe not. The other is this, fomenting insurgency by minorities. The other one, and it appears quite unclear to what an extent Israel is into this idea, is kind of finding people inside the regime. We know that the Iranian regime, when it was established, was made up of many quite ideological individuals. As time went on, they became very, very rich, very, very corrupt. And now, according, for example, to the writings of Karim Sajapur, the majority are basically thieves. And therefore, in theory, could become leaders of Iran who are repressive and corrupt, but do not pose a threat to Israel or to U.S. interests. But it is unclear to what an extent this is something that is possible to engineer. Clearly, Israel and the U.S., they have intelligence penetration into the leadership of the regime to some extent, but it is not clear to what an extent this penetration would allow them, for example, to activate individuals who are straight up working for them to become the next leader, or whether it would be these individuals who are so corrupt that they're seen as harmless, So, any potential, there are many individuals who could be potentially people with whom you could work, because corruption is so widespread, because people are out just looking for themselves. But it's unclear to what an extent they can command networks of power inside the IRGC. So I think this is, President Trump mentioned in one of his in one of the interviews, one of the comments that he made, that we had, we thought about several individuals would be good fits for the day after Khamenei, who are not as ideological, who are basically these thieves, with whom you can cut a deal, kind of like the Venezuela model. But then we killed them on the first strike because the strikes were so successful. So clearly, I think maybe the longer this war continues, there will be more opportunity to discover for people to reach out, But this really just seems to be kind of the military planning is clearly very careful, very methodical. But then the kind of day after thing that was kind of left, I think, was not fully formed.
Yeah. Anyway, we have three models: Gaza, Trump's plan, then Maduro in Venezuela, then today Iran. We have three different models we can build on and discuss while on the go. But I will go to Sultan, and after that, we'll be opening the floor for questions. Sultan, what about specifically Saudi Arabia now? Because we've seen that Saudi Arabia's or Riyadh's posture in the region as a main player increased post 7th of October, even the decrease of the Egyptian role, even the Jordanians were smaller. Turkey were keeping silent. Now, everyone was appeasing Riyadh, which then they forged the kind of a defense agreement with Pakistan. They widening, then the Emiratis, they're all partners in Yemen. So where Saudi is standing, and we will be opening the questions after your answer.
Yeah, so very quickly. So since 2019, since the oil structures in Saudi was hit by Iranians in September 2019. Saudi Arabia took a different regional policy that is focused mainly on reconciliation, zero problem, trying to resolve issues around the region, and etc. And that manifested itself into a conflict with the United Arab Emirates and over Sudan and Yemen in the last few months. So with this war happening, we've seen a quick reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and UAE. We see an increased collaboration between Gulf countries on defense perspective and also in media perspective. But also we see some kind of small divergence on how to deal with the situation. And the Gulf countries now are stuck in a collective action problem, where if one country joined the attacks in Iran, that would pressure the others to also join, because they don't want to be seen as the ones who are getting hit without being proactive in attacking Iran. So this is where situation is. As for a long term, it's looking bad for Saudi, because all the three potential outcomes from this war seems not optimal for Saudi. A chaos in Iran, or a new regime in Iran that it is aligned with the United States and stuff like that, or an emboldened new version or modified version of the regime. And all of these, then we can discuss in the Q&A. Thank you.
Lovely, lovely. It's there. There are loads to discuss, but time is flying. I'll open up for questions, and the first question is for Faysal. So I'll bring you in equally, giving the share. How well equipped is the Lebanese government in combating violation of Lebanese sovereignty and truly supporting displaced families?
Okay. Those are two very different things, but the answer to both of them is not very. They are not. This whole thing with them, so they've pledged, obviously, to disarm Hezbollah effectively in the country, and now they have repledged and said that Hezbollah's weapons are illegal, and therefore they will arrest people from Hezbollah who are fighting. There was never any situation in which, face to face, the army was going to win a battle with Hezbollah. The whole issue and question of that has been basically a bluff game between them and Hezbollah, with them calculating that Hezbollah doesn't want trouble. So they're going to basically cede control of certain areas, certain weapons, etc. That was the case before this latest escalation. And I think it's especially the case now that this calculation that Hezbollah doesn't want trouble, I think is even more important, even more relevant. So what I see is not a collision straight out between the army and Hezbollah. That would destroy the army, even if it really seriously harms Hezbollah, but it would destroy the army. And it would probably split it up along sectarian lines, because about half the army is Shia, almost half are Shia. So what you're much more likely to get is basically a series of pushing and pulling, where the army ends up taking what it wants from Hezbollah, and Hezbollah has no choice but to give it up. That is not a military capability thing. That's a calculation on both sides about whether a fight is worth it. They are not. Look, the army doesn't have enough money to pay the salaries of its soldiers. They actually moonlight as delivery drivers or whatever at night just so they can eat. So I don't want to exaggerate their capabilities. Taking care of the human wave that's going to result from a Israeli ground incursion into the south, they cannot do it. It would be excellent for them if they could. It would be excellent for their reputation. It would be bad for Hezbollah. But unfortunately, it's not doable without much more money and much more capability. And for that, they're wholly dependent on the West, mostly, and maybe Qatar to a larger extent. And we don't know how the West is going to see them in relation to Hezbollah. If they start going aggressively after Hezbollah's weapons, then they'll make more friends in the West, and the Israelis will leave them alone, etc. But that's not clear. But what I can do is tell you, Hezbollah is not going to pick a fight with the army over any of these things. So at least we're there. More than that, it gets more complicated.
All right, thank you. For Caroline, another question. What role are non-state actors playing in shaping escalation risk right now, especially as we are seeing increased arming Kurdish groups across the region?
Certainly, I think we all saw the report last night, that came out assessing that the CIA was corresponding with a variety of different Kurdish majority groups that were both based in Iraq and Iran. I think it's possible that we could see some degree of mobilization. Whether it's going to be effective in achieving the goal that the United States and Israel share, which is regime change, I think that's a whole other question. I think that that would be very difficult to accomplish. And I think that, this is a signal and a representation of, as both Liz and Faysal just mentioned, that this is just a lot of experimentation. I think that this administration thought that this experience in Iran would be a mirror to the experience that they had just about a month and a half ago in Venezuela, in the sense of it was, a military victory. It was a very precise operation. They were able to essentially take custody of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, take him onto the United States, onto US soil, and proceed from there. And I think that in Iran, it's much more complicated, not only because they are not seeking to kidnap, but they're seeking to conduct a regime change operation, but also just the size, the scope, the nature of Iran is so different. I think that when it comes to other non-state actors, I think we should all be watching not only what's happening inside of Iran, what's happening inside of Lebanon and Israel, but also we should all have our eyes on Iraq to see what Iran-backed proxy militias are about to do. Same goes with Yemen, monitoring what Houthi militants might do in response to this escalation, as well as other non-state actors, even terrorist organizations, especially since just about last week, a week and a half ago, we saw mass transfers and even escapes from key IS detention centers like Al-Hol. And, that was a whole news cycle ago. It feels much longer ago, but I think it is notable that there have been other key breakout moments and signs of vulnerability in the region that were preceding this escalation that we're seeing in the region.
Yeah, IS will be definitely happy with what's going on, and Shia Juro unable to create like the Sunni kind of jihadism as it happened after the fall of Saddam Hussein regime in 2003. That's one element. So you spotted really the areas where the hot areas. There is a question for Liz now, but I will ask my colleagues to make it short, please, because we are running out of time and we're getting loads of questions. Elizabeth, what would a victorious Iran behave like after the war? Would it be alienated and be more violent, or work on convincing the Gulf that it's all the fault of the US and Israel?
That's hard to imagine how it would be victorious. I mean, everything is getting, all of its military capacities are getting horribly degraded as we speak. So, but I guess we can answer the question of what Iran would look like if the regime remained standing, which is quite possible. I would say the most likely scenario, that kind of a changed regime, a much weaker regime, remains in place. I think definitely there would be a reckoning with Arab Gulf states. The extent of violence used against them in terms of missile strikes and drones far exceeds what has been fired at Israel. So this is something that has shocked Gulf governments, that has shocked observers, particularly countries that have been close and friendly to the Iranian regime, like Qatar and Oman. And Oman doesn't even host any U.S. bases. The excuse that Iran is using, for destroying hotels and all over the place, is that they're targeting U.S. bases or U.S. soldiers. Oman doesn't even have those. So I think this is something that if Israeli leadership was not so hardline and completely opposed to granting Palestinians any rights, it could have capitalized on for creating kind of an alliance with the Gulf. But because Israel is just so right wing right now, that seems less likely. So, and Iran in that kind of situation, it depends on to what an extent the regime's capabilities will be degraded. It will definitely try to show that things are as normal domestically, but thus far it has spent a great deal of effort, a great deal of money in sustaining this, these militia proxies. Hezbollah, for example, cost the Iranian regime $1 billion over the past year. Can they still afford it? In theory, they can't. They couldn't afford it even before the country is in an economic crisis, and yet they still prioritize that. So I think it's a bit too early to say because we don't know really in what kind of a shape this regime will emerge. But I think that Iran's ability to project power will be damaged anyway, because so much of its ability to inject itself stemmed from it being perceived as a regional power in Iraq and in Lebanon. A visit by an Iranian official is something that mattered, that changed things. Now I think things will be different, even if this regime survives.
Interesting. Thank you very much. There are two questions for Caroline. I will regroup them together. First one, the effect of this conflict on the dynamics in Syria, as we seeing ISIS are trying to exploit the instability there or instability in general. And also, what about as your assessment for the timeline for the conflict? What will be actually would be for a month-long operation, or what your assessment on this?
So, and I'd also love to hear thoughts from like Liz and Faysal. They've also done some really great work on Syria. I think in terms of the timeline, Trump says 4 to 5 weeks, and the War Powers Act, I believe, is 60 days. I also think just in terms of the tempo of this administration, we also have concurrent operations that are happening in Mexico and in some cases in Venezuela. It was announced just today that military advisors are being sent to Ecuador. So I think that there are many different distractions. I think that it will wind down within 4 weeks, at least before the War Powers Act has to be invoked, because I think that this administration knows that there will be congressional pushback. Only 1 in 4 Americans have supported this initiative in Iran. I think that's key to note. And typically, American public opinion weighs a bit more heavily on administrations, more so than the Trump administration. But still, I do think that is going to serve as a key constraint, and as well as voices inside of the MAGA movement and within Trump's own party. I think that there's been resistance even there. So I think eventually, once Congress starts to come more and more into the picture and into the fold, that will be a major constraint. When it comes to impact on Syria, things have been relatively quiet as this escalation has ensued. Especially after the recent SDF deal, after the transfer of detainees from Syria into Iraq. But I think, as many CT experts and analysts on Syria and the region will say, it will take time for organizations like IS to recruit, to accumulate influence, to accumulate momentum. So I wouldn't expect any sort of major outbreak in the next week or two, knock on wood. But this will be, I think, something that we'll all have to monitor for at least a year or more, especially given the fact that there are many detainees that we just do not know the whereabouts of, both within and outside of Syria.
I remember in the West Bank, every time you discuss with a Palestinian about an international incident or affair, he said the attic is full, Sidde Maliane. So it's the same in Syria. They have their own attic full, I think. The question for Sultan and Liz: will the removal of Iran effectively as a regional spoiler bring normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel closer, or no? Why? And please, if you keep it short, there is another question for Faysal after that, and we'll wrap up. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'll go first. I think that a lot will depend on the next Israeli elections. If the outcome of the war is seen as positive in Israel, Netanyahu will likely move the elections closer to benefit from the bump from the war. After the 12-day war, his Likud party jumped 6 seats in the polls, so he will want to capitalize on that. And then then Israel will have elections, and at that point, currently in the polls, Netanyahu cannot form a government, but the opposition struggles to do so as well. It would basically require the support of Arab parties, something that the Israeli center, whatever is left of the left, the Israeli center is resisting. So if the next government is a Netanyahu government, it will be a right-wing government. It will not. I do not see that it will make progress towards normalization. It is simply the minimum that Saudi Arabia is willing to accept is more than Israel is willing to give on the Palestinian issue. And if the government changes, that increases the likelihood. And the new government will want a major achievement. It will also rely on support of parties that are not as radical, and therefore we may see actually normalization moving forward, in my view.
Lovely, thank you, Sultan. And I have another question for you, so you can answer both together. That is, how would you explain differences in Iranian attacks on the Gulf countries? Example, Bahrain and Kuwait versus Saudi Arabia and Emirates. Of course, with the first question about the normalization possibility.
Sure. For the normalization, I think normalization has never been a necessity for Saudi Arabia or a regional necessity for Saudi Arabia. Normalization, mostly in the Arab world, means extracting more concessions from the United States. And between 2018 up to 2023, the Saudi Arabia was boxed into that the only path toward Washington comes through normalization. After the October War, these two things got decoupled. Normalization from improving the relationship, getting concessions from the United States, slowly got decoupled, and now the Saudi don't think that they need to do normalization in order to get more concessions, more benefits from the United States. Absent an Iranian regional hegemon in the region, would that improve the likelihood of having a normalization? I think that would depend on what appears after. If it is a chaos, then that would most likely would not increase the normalization, because Saudi would be busy fighting. If there is a regime that it is more pro-United States, more inclined to improve relationship with Israel, then that would create a competition between that new Iran with Saudi Arabia over regional reasons. And that would depend solely on what comes after the current regime, if it collapses. For the second question, I would say I don't think that there is a centralized calculation from the Iranian part on that derives these attacks, because it seems that the Iranians have decentralized management on launching these attacks. But if we can deduce any kind of a pattern from these kind of divergence in attacks, I would say that the UAE got the most, because it has three features that other Gulf countries, they don't have. It's the only Gulf country with sizable population that has built a strong normalization with Israel. It is a country that has built this narrative about Gulf being a safe haven for people who come from all over the world, and it's also the country that hosts most population from all around, but mostly from the Western countries. So attacking the UAE would make sense in order to so Dubai is a city that is everyone in the world knows, but if you're attacking Kuwait, Doha, you have to do. And for the other countries, I think because the presence of the bases, so Saudi Arabia and Oman got the least hits because they don't have permanent military bases, but the others because they have access. So you can base it on these two factors: the attractivity of the region for tourism and global capital, and the presence of security arrangement with both Israel and the United States.
Thank you very much. And the last question for Faysal. This attempt for regime change in Iran by the US, how risky is it in the sense that it would break Iran apart and produce a Syria or Iraq scenario?
I mean, I think it's incredibly risky because Iran is first of all, very big. Second of all, there's a lot of people in it. Third of all, you have at least two major military forces there, the IRGC and the army. You have almost half the population of Iran is not Persian. It's various other ethnicities. It's a complicated geography, and we're not there on the ground. So if you had 200,000 U.S. troops in Iran, it'd be different. Obviously, it'd be a complete mess too, but you'd have some sort of control over the trajectory of the local politics and the fighting. But if you're just bombing the place and degrading its institutions, and there's no organized opposition, there's no unified movement. No, I mean, you have all the ingredients in place for it to be an unholy mess, absolutely. And because, like most of my colleagues, I don't think we're going to send anyone into Iran or try to shape its politics. I think this is the most likely outcome of breaking the regime. Of course, it's very difficult to tell from outside, even if you've infiltrated a lot of it, which the Israelis obviously have. It's very difficult to tell what means when a regime breaks and when it's just kind of being weakened, and when its repressive apparatus is weakened, whether anyone is going to take advantage of that. So this is just one of those real, like, again, if you're the Israelis, you have the luxury of not caring that much, so as long as you achieve your basic war aims, and to an extent, the US as well. But if you're a neighbor of Iran, then things are more dirty for you and more messy. But I think it contains all the ingredients of being shattered and becoming very, very unstable, unless elements of the regime survive that are strong enough to retain control. Which, by the way, as both Liz and Caroline have mentioned, that's entirely probable too. So we're not going to be in this war forever. Maybe the Israelis will be, but not the United
All right.
States.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Faysal, Liz, Caroline, and Sultan. It's been real pleasure. I know there are loads of questions. I apologize to all our attendees that we couldn't put all these questions and answer them. We hope in the next MEPC seminars, webinars, events, just stay tuned. We'll come back to you. This was Murad Batal Shishani with you, and thank you very much again for everyone and who took part in this webinar. See you soon.